Okay, children, in the last class we discussed money from the point of view of the consumers, i.e., from the demand side. But in this class, we'll be discussing money from the supply side, that is, from the RBI's and the government side. So we can name the lecture as Why Can't the Government or the RBI Print Infinite Money? And mind you, this was once done in the United States, and we'll be discussing that example in the end of the video. This is the sixth master class of the series, so let's get started. Let's say the money supply is being increased by the RBI, which will in turn increase the effective demand in the economy because people will be having a lot of money in their hands, which will increase the demand for a product, which will increase its price. And in the last class, we discussed what is the general increase in the price of a product. It is called inflation. So the inflation will be increased. Now, before we deduce why inflation is bad or good for an economy, if inflation is good or bad for an economy, let's discuss two types of inflations. First is demand pull inflation, and second is cost push inflation. Demand pull inflation means that when a demand for a product is increasing, when a demand for when demand for goods are increasing, there is a pull from the consumer side. So demand pull inflation is good for an economy. But when the factors of production like wages, land, loans, these kinds of factors are being increased, there is a cost push inflation, which means the input by an entrepreneur is increased, so he increases the price of a product so that he can make a profit out of it. So cost push inflation is bad. Now we'll be discussing different types of inflation and how they affect the economy. First is creeping inflation, which is 0 to 3% inflation rate. This happens when there is demand pull inflation. This is considered good by the RBI, and it should be there in an economy. Then the walk-in inflation means 3 to 10% of inflation. This is manageable by the RBI, but it has to be managed before it converts into galloping inflation, which is 10 to 50% of inflation. This is really bad for an economy. This kind of inflation can be seen in Pakistan right now, where the inflation is 50 or up to 50% per month. Then the hyperinflation is really bad, which is above 50% of inflation. This happened recently in 2010s in Venezuela, where the inflation was 13,000%. It happened in 1920s in Germany, where the inflation was 13 billion percentage. Why is creeping inflation good for an economy? It suggests that the economy is flourishing because the demand is increasing in the economy, which means that the consumers have money. So many producers from outside the country wants to come into the country to make profits in the country and provide their services to the consumers of India. Now we'll be discussing how the US messed up in the 2008 financial crisis. During the period of 2000 to, let's say, 2007, the US Federal Reserve started giving out loans to the banks to give out to the housing market at 0% interest rate, which essentially meant that banks could borrow money from the US Feds at 0% interest, which led to banks providing the consumers loans at 3 to 4% interest rate, which led to a bubble in the housing market. This bubble will be studied deeply in the coming lectures, so stay tuned for that. This much interest rate led to one person having two to three houses, which made it impossible for the government to regulate the prices of the houses because US is a capitalist country. Now, because one person had two to three houses, the house prices went through the roof and they were inflated out of the hands of the US government. Because the US Fed did not take an interest, the banks started borrowing more and more, which led to building more and more houses. But as land is finite, there can only be some amount of people getting a lot of houses. This bubble was a lot more complicated when it happened, so it would require a full lecture for it, and it was very interesting to understand and to see everything in front of your eyes happening. So stay tuned for it. Subscribe for more.